Before humanity learned to name the stars, it learned to name the dark. Long before temples, before laws, before reason itself, there was fear. It lived in the sound of the wind passing through the reeds, in the echo of footsteps behind us when no one was there. And out of that fear, people began to shape shadows into stories. Every ancient culture had a word for what couldn't be seen. The Mesopotamians spoke of Edimu, the restless dead. The Arabs whispered about ghouls that haunted empty deserts. In the misty forests of Europe, villagers swore that the night itself could take form and follow them home. To survive, people needed to understand what hunted them, even if that threat was only in the mind. In those early centuries, there was no boundary between the physical and the spiritual. A sickness, a storm, or a sudden disappearance could all be the work of unseen beings. Fear filled the gaps that knowledge hadn't yet reached. And from that fear came creation, the creation of monsters. The strange thing is, these beings were never only evil. They were reflections of hunger, grief, jealousy, desire. When humans couldn't speak openly about those emotions, they turned them into legends. Each culture, without knowing it, painted its inner turmoil across the canvas of the world. The Arabian desert, where the horizon swallows everything, gave birth to the ghūl, a creature that feeds on travelers who lose their way, a spirit born not from the devil, but from isolation itself. In the north, where endless winters crushed the human spirit, people imagined the wendigo, a soul consumed by hunger until it forgot it was human. And in the warm Mediterranean nights, stories told of Lamia, a mother who had lost her child and became a predator of others. Different lands, different faces, yet all born from the same source: the fear of becoming what we hate. Even the earliest cave paintings, with their half-human figures, may be echoes of this fear. The idea that the line between man and beast is dangerously thin. To create monsters was, paradoxically, to remain human. By giving terror a name, people could fight it, contain it, or at least understand it. And so, from firelight and silence, the world's first myths took root. They were not just stories to scare children. They were warnings, lessons, maps for the mind. To speak of monsters was to speak indirectly of ourselves. Once the first shadows had names, stories began to multiply. Every valley, river, and mountain shaped its own creature, each one born from what people feared most in that place. The darkness started to speak with many tongues. In the Arabian deserts, the ghūl was not just a phantom. It was a traveler's warning. Those who left the path, who ignored the stars or the voice of reason, might vanish into dunes that had no end. The ghūl appeared as a lost woman or a wounded pilgrim, asking for help, and when compassion drew you closer, she revealed her true shape. Not as punishment, but as a mirror, to teach that even kindness, when blind, can destroy. Far to the north, among snow and hunger, came another voice, the wendigo. It was not a demon in the Christian sense, but a human transformed by greed and famine. A spirit born when survival erased morality. Its legend reminded people that hunger was not only in the stomach, but in the heart, the hunger for more, for power, for what others had. To speak of the wendigo was to speak of the limits of being human. In the Mediterranean, under gentler skies, fear wore beauty's mask. The Greeks told of Lamia, a queen cursed by Hera, who wandered through nights stealing the children of others to fill the void of her own loss. Later poets softened her into a symbol of forbidden desire, but her origin was simpler and more tragic. She was grief turned outward. The lesson was not about monsters, but about pain that consumes itself. In Japan, the red-faced Oni emerged, horned spirits of rage and retribution. They were not born evil. They became what humans cast out. Criminals, exiles, and the shamed transformed into demons by society's judgment. The Oni remind us that when we push people beyond forgiveness, we create the very devils we fear. And in the forests of Africa, stories spoke of Sasabansum, a creature hanging upside down from trees, watching over the living with hooked limbs. He punished those who hunted for pleasure, not need, a spirit of balance in disguise. Through him, fear guarded the forest. Everywhere the pattern repeats. What each culture calls demon is the same force through a different lens. Isolation, greed, grief, punishment, guilt, all given shape so they could be seen, named, and remembered. Monsters were the language of emotion before psychology existed. They spoke what could not yet be analyzed. They said, "This is what happens when we forget who we are." When you listen closely, the voices of these creatures do not sound so alien. They whisper in the same tone as conscience, as hunger, as memory. Before humanity built walls between heaven and hell, there were only thresholds. The sacred and the profane shared the same breath. And what we now call demons were once gods, spirits, or guardians of balance. In the earliest myths, no being was entirely good or evil. The divine was wild, unpredictable like weather. When rain nourished crops, it was a blessing. When it flooded homes, it became a curse. The same power, different outcome. And so, early people didn't worship purity, they worshipped harmony. Their rituals existed to keep forces in balance, to remind nature that humans understood its moods. In Sumer and Babylon, rituals of clay and blood were used to summon and calm spirits. Amulets carved with the image of Pazuzu, a winged lion-faced creature, were worn not to summon evil, but to protect pregnant women from it. Fear itself became a weapon turned against darker fear. Across the Mediterranean, in the temples of Egypt and Greece, priests spoke of beings who could walk both paths. A god of the dead was also a god of rebirth. Serpents symbolized both wisdom and danger. Fire could destroy or purify. Everything carried its own opposite. And the task of the living was to keep that duality from collapsing. Among druids and shamans, this truth was literal. They believed the world had thin places, spots where reality itself grew soft, where wind, water, or song could carry a person between realms. There, spirits didn't need summoning. They simply listened. When you entered those spaces, you weren't praying. You were negotiating. Every offering, every word was part of a cosmic conversation. The ancient Persians developed that conversation into doctrine. They divided existence into light and shadow. But even in Zoroastrianism, where good and evil became named opposites, the enemy wasn't chaos, it was imbalance. Too much order was as deadly as too much freedom. Across the world, boundaries became sacred. Doorways, riverbanks, the edges of forests. These were not just places, but symbols of transformation. The threshold is where humans meet the unknown. Demons linger there because thresholds are about choice. Crossing them changes everything. Even now, we keep rituals that echo that logic. We knock on wood, light candles, circle salt. Not because we believe in ancient magic, but because we inherited its grammar. We still draw lines between safety and risk, between known and unseen, and we still feel watched when we stand on the edge. The ancients believed that to cross that edge without respect was to vanish. To walk between worlds was never a sin, only a responsibility. It meant remembering that what we fear might also be what protects us. The gods, the demons, the guardians, they were never separate. They were the same presence, viewed from opposite sides of the veil. Thousands of years later, their names may have changed. But the shadows have not. The same shapes that haunted temple walls now linger in language, in symbols carved above doors, in festivals lit by fire and fear. Even the most rational societies carry the bones of mythology beneath their skin. When we say someone is haunted, possessed, or battling inner demons, we speak the grammar of ancient fear. Our phrases are fossils of belief, remnants of a time when words themselves were spells. Language remembers what reason forgets. Science, of course, replaced myth as our main torch in the dark. It measured what was once magical, and named what once needed prayer. But in doing so, it never truly erased the mystery. It only changed its vocabulary. The psychologist now listens where the priest once stood. When Jung described the shadow self, he was giving new language to an old truth, that what we call evil often lives inside us, unacknowledged, and that ignoring it makes it stronger. The hero and the monster still wrestle, only now in the mind. Anthropologists found another echo. They saw that monsters arise wherever rules exist. Every taboo, every fear, Every unspoken boundary creates its own guardian. The banshee, the siren, the ghūl, all remind us what happens when we trespass. The monsters don't guard places. They guard principles. Archaeology revealed the same pattern in stone. Symbols recur everywhere. The serpent, the horn, the eye, the circle. The serpent coils between life and death. The horn marks both divinity and defiance. The eye warns of envy and watches over purity. Even today, we hang the evil eye charm in our homes, a fragment of Mesopotamian ritual surviving on supermarket shelves. Festivals, too, carry the rhythm of old fears dressed as celebration. Halloween, Oban, Dia de los Muertos, Samhain. Each lets the dead return for one night. We laugh, wear masks, carve pumpkins. But behind the laughter lies a contract with the unseen. Acknowledge it, and it will not harm you. Ignore it, and it may remind you that it still exists. Our world claims to be enlightened, but its architecture still worships symmetry. The old idea that balance holds chaos at bay. Our screens glow where fires once burned. Our myths walk again in digital skins. Vampires reborn as icons. AI demons whispering in code. The costumes have changed. The story has not. To fear is human. To name that fear is what makes us civilized. Science and myth were never enemies. They were partners. One seeks to explain the world, the other to endure it. Together they remind us that truth is not only what we can prove, but what we continue to feel in the dark. Even now, when satellites map every corner of the earth and algorithms predict our desires, we still create monsters. We call them by new names: obsession, addiction, rage, loneliness. But the shape of the fear is the same. It hides behind progress, quietly asking whether the light we chase is strong enough to face the shadows we bring with us. Our ancestors believed demons lived in caves, forests, and deserts. Today they live in screens, in data, in the noise that never stops. The haunted place has moved from landscape to consciousness. We no longer fear the beast outside the fire. We fear the emptiness when the fire goes out. Every horror movie, every ghost story, every myth retold is a confession. We are still trying to understand ourselves through symbols of danger. When we watch a monster rise on screen, what we're really watching is our own reflection. Our cruelty, our hunger, our endurance. It's the same ancient ritual, just louder and brighter. But there is beauty in this continuity, because the survival of fear means the survival of meaning. Monsters are not proof of darkness. They are proof of imagination. They remind us that courage has value, that empathy matters, that every generation must learn again where its limits lie. In the end, every myth, from the ghūl to the wendigo, from Lamia to Oni, is about one thing: what happens when we lose balance. Some tales warn, others forgive, but all point toward the same horizon. That light and shadow are partners, not rivals. We no longer carve warnings in stone. We record them in film, in art, in the language of fear itself. And still, as the ancients once did, we tell stories beside the glow. A different kind of fire. A screen instead of flame. Trying to remember who we are when the night grows long. So when you hear a whisper in the dark, in the wind, in your thoughts, or in the silence between them, perhaps it isn't calling to frighten you. Perhaps it's reminding you that fear, too, has its purpose. That every shadow is proof of a light still burning. Because what we fear most has always been part of us. And to face it, to understand it, is what makes us human.